Greetings, fellow followers of the stars. This is Rick Levine with your February 2022 forecast. Before we get into the forecast material, I have a couple of announcements I'd like to make. First of all, I know many of you have been a little bit confused by the message that you may have seen on my Instagram. Here's the clarification. I have two real Instagram accounts, one personal, one business. The business is where all the astrology focus is, but as many of you know, a few months ago I had some problems with my business account. That's Rick Levine Astrologer, all one word, Rick Levine Astrologer, and that account was stolen and hacked, and I lost it and all of my followers there. Since then, that account has been reported as fraud and discontinued, and I now have a new account, business account, for all of you who want my daily planet pulses on Rick Levine Astrologer. It's the same old name, but even if you had been getting my daily planet pulse column prior, you're no longer signed up. We're starting from scratch. So I need all of you to go, those of you who follow on Instagram or those of you who want good astrology on a daily basis on Instagram, go to Rick Levine Astrologer and sign up. Now, Rick Merlin is a separate account, and that's my personal account, although many of you have been getting my astrology there since the other account was hacked. That will eventually discontinue the astrology. If you're already there, I don't mind you following me there, but eventually the astrology will be only on Rick Levine Astrologer. I know that many of you had been confused as to whether or not the second account was mine also. They are both mine, but as many of you who have followed me on Rick Levine Astrologer know, that it's not quite a daily horoscope that I write. I don't write something for all 12 signs, but it's like a daily muse, a daily astrological reflection. And so enough said there. Rick Levine Astrologer, please help me out. Go there and follow me there. All right, end of number one. Number two. Also, as many of you know, I will be in Los Angeles the first weekend of February as a featured speaker on the first time ever astrology track at Conscious Life Expo, which is February 4th through the 7th at the LAX, that's the Los Angeles airport, at the LAX Hilton. ConsciousLifeExpo.com has the complete program. It's a huge array with a couple of hundred exhibitors, over 100 speakers on topics like UFOs, conspiracy, reincarnation, crystals, lifestyle, and of course, astrology. I will be doing lectures and workshops on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. If you want the full program, go to ConsciousLifeExpo.com, and you can find the full program there along with all my offerings. And it's going to be a heck of a weekend. And if you go, and if you are going there because you learned about it here on YouTube, on my monthly YouTube, please come up to me, introduce yourselves, let me know that you came because of this. That's number two. Number three is a very exciting announcement, and this really ties into the Conscious Life Expo a bit, but this is about an announcement that is about a newly to-be released 10-part documentary that is based upon the work of Dr. Richard Tarnas, Rick Tarnas, who wrote Cosmos and Psyche. And this 10-part documentary will be released on February 22nd. And for 10 days, there will be a free 24-hour screening of each episode. So you can watch all 10 episodes for free or watch any ones that you want, but only starting on February 22nd, one a day for 10 days.
Is this just some sort of disturbance in the force?
These are truly uncharted times.
There are periods in history when human energies, both constructive and destructive, seem to come to a boil.
I don't know if you can remember the last time we have seen a world this much in chaos.
You didn't know better. You'd think something larger was at work.
Something is happening here, and you don't know what it is. That something is happening again.
Is there a correlation between human history and the movement of the planets?
Tracing back in history the many times that Uranus and Pluto came into conjunction or opposition or the square, it would coincide with historical periods that have a...
You can be notified of the links for those daily, but you must sign up in advance. You just can't do it and decide that you're going to do it and go do it that day. You need to sign up in advance. I will put that link here on the screen, but for copying and pasting, I will also put it in the notes below so that you can have a live link or a link that you can copy and paste depending on what computer you're on. That link, there's no cost, there's no obligation. That link will be basically a free advanced registration so that you will be notified and you will receive emails with the links for the daily free screenings of the documentary, which is called The Changing of the Gods. I can't stress how exciting this documentary is. Many of us know astrology because we follow it about following the changes that we have in our individual behavior or the behavior of our friends and family. But this is a slightly different orientation, and this looks at the slow movement of outer planets, in particular the planets Uranus and Pluto, which is what this documentary focuses on, because many of you know the Uranus-Pluto conjunction of 1965-66, which really impacted the 60s all the way into the early 70s, and then the Uranus-Pluto square of 2012 to 2015, which really impacted 2010 to all the way through now, and the similarities between these two periods of time and following issues like suffrage and civil rights and changes of governmental structure and technology advances. It's not just about these two, it's about these cycles tracked all the way back. It's a fascinating documentary. I can't recommend it more heartily than I sound excited about it, because I've been privileged to actually do some previews of all 10 episodes, and it is truly, truly an awe-inspiring documentary. After the 10-day free showing, one day at a time, it will only be available for pay. So if you want to see it for free, get the link, go there now. Or soon, sign up and register for free to get the free connection to it. Also, at the Conscious Life Expo in Los Angeles on Saturday, February 5th, we will be doing a screening of episode 1 of The Changing of the Gods. And afterwards, there will be an astrological panel. I think I'm leading that panel. If not, I'll be on it, but I will be there. And it will be a panel discussion about these great and crazy historical changes that we're going through. And in fact, this is one of the topics that I will be lecturing about on Monday. What the hell is really going on? What's the big picture? Why has 2020, 2021, and this whole decade really right up to now and through now, why has it been so intense? That's what this movie is all about, and I will be addressing that separate from the movie. So, thank you for your indulgence, and now let's get into the month of February. So, first of all, February has an oddity to it. Its oddity is that the two most important events of February occur on January 31st and March 2nd. I know that sounds a little crazy, but because February is short, obviously 28 days, And because January had two new moons in it, one at the very beginning of the month and one on January 31st. In some places, that new moon might have fallen on February 1st if you're on the east coast of the United States or in Western Europe or in Europe for that matter. But the actual new moon, at least where I live here in Seattle, occurs on January 31st. It's not technically part of February. And yet it's such a powerful new moon that we're going to start off, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. The next new moon occurs on March 2nd or 3rd, depending upon where you are in the world. And even though that's not part of February, we're going to take a look at it again because these two new moons are so significant about understanding what the heck's going on in February. So that's one oddity about this month. The month is kind of intriguing because it's the beginning of almost 2 months of no retrogrades at all. Now, for those of you who have been watching this on a monthly basis, you know that toward the end of summer, last summer, we had all the outer planets, the heavyweights, going from the heaviest inward. We had Pluto and Neptune and Chiron and Uranus and Saturn and Jupiter all retrograde. One by one, they turned direct. Actually all the way through January. And all the outer planets now are moving direct. However, we had Venus turn retrograde, and then we had Mercury turn retrograde. And we open this month with Venus having already turned direct, but it moves oh so very slowly at the beginning of the month, and therefore it's not making a lot of aspects. We add to that the fact that Mercury turned retrograde last month, and it turns direct on February 3rd. And what that means is that it is also moving very, very slowly at first. And so we have both Mercury and Venus turning direct. And on February 3rd, when Mercury turns direct, and by maybe the beginning of the second week of February, when both Mercury and Venus are kind of gaining speed and moving a little bit faster, that will be the first time when all the planets will be moving direct. Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and I left out Chiron. They'll all be moving direct. And because of that, February feels like fresh energy. Now, we're not going to dump the energy that we had from 2021 as quickly as we would like. Many of you know that we followed the Saturn-Uranus square all through 21, going all the way back to January when Jupiter squared Uranus, and then in February when Saturn squared Uranus. Those two dates tied to the insurrection at the Capitol and then the second impeachment of Donald Trump. Those two events were the opening volleys of the Saturn-Uranus square, but that took us all the way up through the end of the year when the third and final, the second one was in the middle of June, and the third and final square was actually on Christmas Eve or Christmas Eve, depending upon where you live on the planet. But this bifurcation that we feel like history has reached, this sense of two different realities over so many issues, we're not going down that rabbit hole, but that rabbit hole where there are people who have just very different realities about what it is that has occurred is mostly because of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction back in January of 2020, leading to the Saturn-Uranus square, where there's a conflict between the old Saturn, the new Uranus, the hold the status quo together Saturn, the break free into the future progressive Uranus. Again, I've talked about this month in, month out for a year now, and that square was exact just a week before the new year began, And by the beginning of February, the orb is nearly 5 degrees on that. So that aspect is separating. However, and here's the important thing. Although the aspect does not come back into being exact, it does come back within a degree, actually within a half a degree, this autumn through September, October, even into November. And we're going to be experiencing a remedial lesson about all this stuff. We're not quite through yet, although there's a sense right now that there's some moving away from it, and that's because the orb has opened up to 5 degrees. One of the key things about February, and we'll track this actually month by month throughout this whole year, is that when planets sweep through mid-fixed fixed signs are Taurus, fixed earth, Leo, fixed fire, Scorpio, fixed water, and Aquarius, fixed air. When planets move through the middle part of the fixed signs, they will be squaring, opposing, or conjoining Saturn and or Uranus. Now this happened all through last year, and last year Saturn, which was moving quicker than Uranus, was at a lower degree. What that means is that planets were conjoining or opposing or squaring Saturn first, and then squaring or opposing or conjoining Uranus either a few days later, a week later, or in some cases just hours later, as that aspect got very, very close. Now that the exact square has occurred, and Saturn is still moving faster, Saturn has moved to a higher degree than Uranus. What this means is that we're now in a different phase where the planets coming round, whether it's the Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, which are all moving through Capricorn or having just moved through Capricorn into Aquarius and then moving through Aquarius, all of these planets, as they're moving through Aquarius, will first square Uranus and then conjoin Saturn. Before, they were meeting up with Saturn first and then Uranus. So it was like hit the wall, hold the brakes back, pull it in, and then Uranus explode through, let it loose, break off into the future. Now it's the other way around, and the planets one by one, especially this month and into next month as they're moving through Aquarius, will first square Uranus, break through, look at the potential, look at the possibilities, and then meet up with Saturn, boom, have to deal with the obstacle or the roadblock or the wall that either makes it real or that you can't push through. And so we're going to see this unfold a couple times in February, and it'll give us a flavor that will become a flavor of 2021 that's very different, a flavor of 2022 that's very different than what went on in 2021. So let's jump in and take a look at some charts and see where we go. Okay, let's start off with the new moon in Aquarius, although it shows here as January 31st, 9:46 p.m. Remember, all times that you will see here are Pacific Standard Time, so let's just be aware that this new moon is showing for January 31st, but it's really the beginning of February. The second thing before I jump into the chart in particular is just acknowledging once again that this is an Aries rising chart, meaning that there are no houses that we can use here. Why do I do that? Because I'm in Seattle and you're in Atlanta or Dallas or Denmark or Turkey or Australia, and therefore why would I run a chart for me only? Because the chart is affecting all of us. You want to look at a chart that is from your locality, you need to rerun it and adjust the time zone accordingly. But if you take this time of 9:46 p.m. and adjust it for your time zone, all the planets will be in their exact locations correctly. But there's no houses. There's no ascendant and midheaven here. Also, just a quick word on the aspects. Mostly here, I'm using the basic, simple aspects of trines and sextiles, which appear as blue. The thicker the line, the closer the orb is to zero or exact. The red lines are squares and oppositions. There are no oppositions here. The green lines will be the semi-sextiles and quincunxes. And we will have on occasion some orange lines that show the half squares or semi-squares and the square and a halves, which are the sesqui-squares or sesqui-quadrates. So those are the aspects primarily that we will be using here. Many of you know that I use other aspects in my natal chart work, but for the mundane chart work, these seem to be the most important, and so for a sake of simplicity, that's what we stick with. All right, so this new moon is, I think, the opening example of the waning effects, but still effects, of the Saturn square Uranus. Because as we look at this chart for January 31st at 9:46 p.m. Pacific time, we can see that Saturn is at 15.5 degrees of Aquarius, and Uranus is at 10, almost 11 degrees of Taurus. What that means is that if we look at the sun and the new moon occurring at 12 degrees of Aquarius in 19 minutes, that both the sun and the moon will have already exactly squared Uranus. The moon would have done it just a few hours ago, because the moon moves a degree every 2 hours. And the sun would have done it a couple of days, I think the day before, 2 days prior to this, because the sun moves about a degree every day. But the actual new moon itself occurs after the sun and moon squared Uranus. Kapow! Something happens. Something breaks through. And by the way, I am recording this on the early morning on February 28th. And so this new moon has not occurred, but as I move through the dates, I will always refer to today as whatever the date of the chart is. And so today, even though I just told you it's January 28th, as we're looking at this chart and I say, well, today, that really means January 31st or the beginning of February 1st, again, depending on what time zone you're in. Okay. As we look at this new moon, the sun and moon square to Uranus has already occurred. Something already broke through. There was a feeling of agitation, a feeling of, Uranus, we say, is expect the unexpected, but sometimes when that lightning strikes, it doesn't feel comfortable. Sometimes it's, wow, we've really broken through some tension. But this is a bit of that, and we can feel, even as we approach this, from talking from a real-time standpoint, that there is agitation in the air. But the new moon itself is coming into a square with Saturn, and therefore there's the heaviness, the reality, the authority that is sitting behind this desire to be in new territory and break through everything. And it turns out that the moon will conjoin Saturn just about 5 or 6 hours after the new moon, because it's the distance from the new moon to Saturn is about 3 degrees. And again, the moon moves 1 degree every 2 hours, so it'll be actually a little bit over 6 hours before that moon lines up with Saturn. But part of the flavor of this new moon is the having to deal with authority, having to deal with the rules, looking at those things we can't change. Saturn is the wall that is there, and if we're out of control, we run into the wall and we don't get anything done. Saturn's the guardrails on the highway, on the curve. If we're going too fast, we can actually go off the road. And so we're moving at a speed now, acknowledging that Saturn is right in front of us, and that the moon will, in fact, line up with Saturn in just a few hours. But more importantly, the sun on February 4th will actually catch up with Saturn, because remember, the sun moves about a degree a day, and there's about 3.5, almost 4 degrees between the sun and Saturn, so that's about 4 days, and we'll see that in just a moment. So this new moon is significant because it gives us the flavor of moving from, we're moving into the future, everything's going to be okay, and it's exciting, and although we're giving up some stability, we're ready for that, to whoops, hold on. The old isn't letting go so fast. The past is not going away. We need to deal with this in a methodical Saturn, structured Saturn way. The other thing here that is intriguing is that Venus, which was retrograding until the 29th of January, Venus here, let's actually move this to February 1st at noon, because all the charts that we will be doing, except for the new and full moon, will be for noon of that day. I've also taken off the aspects to the moon itself, because the moon moves so quickly that if we just look at the chart for 12 noon every day, we will miss some aspects, and we'll see certain aspects because the moon can change aspects over the course of 2 or 3 or 4 hours quite easily, and in fact it does. So we don't have the aspects to the moon showing. We're going to be focusing more on the slower moving planets. What I want you to note, though, is that Venus, which is now moving direct, Mercury is still retrograde. Mercury is retrograde for another couple of days. It turns direct on the evening of February 3rd. But Venus, which had been retrograded back within less than a half a degree to a trine to Uranus. That's that fat blue line between Venus and Uranus. And that aspect never really happened, at least within the past month or so, because Venus had moved all the way through the later degrees of Capricorn. It joined up with Pluto back at the end of 2021, turned retrograde, and backed up, but it didn't back up to 10 degrees and 54 minutes, where it would have been trine to Uranus. And so we might feel this itching, this desire, this feeling like we want Venus. I'd like to have, this would feel good. And what would feel good? Venus trining Uranus is something new, something different, something out of my normal, or any one of our normal realms of desire. And yet, because the trine isn't exact, it doesn't quite get there, and it might leave us feeling a little frustrated, a little bit unfulfilled. But we will notice that over the weeks ahead, that Mars, actually over the days ahead, Mars, which is moving direct, and it's at 6 degrees of Capricorn here, only 4 or 5 degrees away from the exact trine to Uranus, that Mars will reach that trine to Uranus on February 8th, and we'll see that in just a moment. But the point is here is that we have some easy energy expressing to Uranus, the Venus which isn't quite there, and the Mars that's building, and there's this feeling that we're itching for something new, but it's a bit frustrating because it feels like we should have already had it and we don't have it yet. On February 3rd, we can see here that Mercury shows at 24 degrees of Capricorn, and it is now, that has that S for stationary, because in order for a planet to turn from retrograde to direct, or direct to retrograde, it has to stop to change directions. One of the things that I just want to mention here is that if we went back to December of 2021, Venus would have been lining up with Pluto. Then Venus retrograded back over Pluto. And now then Mercury went direct over Pluto, and just over the last few days it retrograded back over Pluto. Now Mercury is turning direct, and Mercury will sweep over Pluto on February 11th, and Venus will sweep over Pluto, but not until March, actually at the new moon on March 2nd or 3rd. What's important about this is that Pluto, our secret's coming out into the open. Pluto has to do with hidden power struggles. It has to do with a plutocracy, with the intense money, the billionaires. We're not talking about Venus wealth to go out and buy flowers or a new TV or a new home. We're talking about Pluto, the immense wealth that's buried underground, the diamond mines, the copper mines, the silver mines. This is all the idea of plutocracy being a government by the wealthy, and Pluto being the planet of immense, immense wealth. What happens when a planet lines up with Pluto, it's like the flavor of that planet goes into the underworld, and we can bring things out into the open. When the sun went over Pluto last month, secrets are revealed. Mercury, we talk about things that are hidden or were hidden and bring them out into the open. But the point here is, without isolating each and every one of these separate transits, what the bigger picture is, one by one, since back in December, Venus, the Sun, Mercury, then Venus retrograde, then Mercury retrograde, then Mercury direct, and then Venus direct, and Mars direct also, will all line up with Pluto. And so we're seeing this extraordinary cap to the Saturn conjunction with Pluto back in January of 2020. See, it's all part of that same energy, Saturn having been the limit of Pluto meeting the wall. Liz Green wrote that Pluto's Saturn's only friend. Well, because Saturn actually can contain Pluto, and in a way, 2020 certainly was a year of containment, if you will. But what we're looking at here is a setup, and I just wanted to make sure that we understood that the beginning of February, with Mercury turning direct, that Mercury will be the first of the planets in February to line up with Pluto, but then Mars and Venus will in very early March, at the new moon in Pisces in March. And interestingly enough, that Mars and Venus are moving at a similar speed. Venus is just coming out of a retrograde, so it's still moving slowly. Mars is actually catching up to Venus, and those two are exactly conjunct at the new moon in March, while they are both mutually conjunct Pluto. Very, very powerful. And incidentally, Mercury will have, is turning direct now, and Mercury will catch up to Saturn and will be lined up with Saturn on that March 2nd, 3rd new moon. And you see what we're seeing here, though, is a handing off of a baton from that Capricorn energy with Pluto there. Pluto isn't done deconstructing stuff. It won't be until next year when the faster moving planets, the Sun and Mercury and Venus, Mars won't be there because Mars is in every other year. It'll be closer to the opposition next January, February. But that will be the last time that these faster inner moving planets are lining up with Pluto before Pluto begins its movement into Aquarius. So we're doing some really powerful cleaning up work of the past now, and as these planets line up one by one with Pluto, they each have to bring something new to the party of bringing things out into the open, and we will watch this unfold for sure. Now, on February 4th, we can actually see that the Sun, from the 3rd to the 4th, we can see that the Sun has caught up with Saturn. On the 3rd, the Sun is at 1457 Aquarius, just at the very last moment of 14 degrees. And by noon the following day, the Sun is actually on the other side of Saturn, and the actual conjunction occurs at about 11 a.m. Pacific Coast. But we also, on the 4th, have Mars making a sextile with Jupiter. So again, we're getting the good news and the bad news together. The good news is that the Mars sextile Jupiter is hope. it's potential. It's like at a sporting event, the confidence of knowing your team is going to win. There's that exuberance almost from the Mars sextile Jupiter, but at the same time we have Saturn lining up with the Sun, and that is the containment around the integrity and the light and the brilliance of the Sun, and it holds things back. So we're getting, again, the going forward and the holding back. But look at that blue line between that Venus, which is moving away from the trine to Uranus, and Mars moving into the trine to Uranus. And we can see also that Jupiter is moving toward a sextile with Uranus. And so we have this kind of little, what some people call a minor grand trine. The trine between Venus, Mars, and Uranus, and the sextiles between first Mars and Jupiter, and then Jupiter and Uranus, and the Jupiter the Jupiter sextile to Uranus occurs on February 17th. So this is kind of a dance that'll take a while for it to unfold. But I think that we're seeing some good news here, and yet there's still, it's like Dad's home, and Dad's not going to let us have the fun that we want to have, because that Saturn is lining up with the Sun, holding that energy back. And although it might not feel great, it's ultimately important, because it's that holding back energy that gives us the capability to get it right, that allows us to mature so that we can handle whatever it is that we're moving into. By February 6th, Mars is now squaring Chiron. You know, we can still see that Jupiter sextiling both the Mars and Venus on one side and the Uranus on the other. There's still this lovely background energy of hope, of potential. And yet we now have Mars exactly squaring Chiron, and this doesn't feel so good. This may be a remembrance of something in the past, or maybe it's just a current wound, or someone who's very insecure. That's the Mars bumping into Chiron and overplays their hand, and in some way then has their hand slapped, or it brings up a memory of something that wasn't so easy or comfortable or even pleasant in the past. By February 8th, we now have Mars having reached the exact trine to Uranus. This is breakthrough. Now, Jupiter is a little bit out of the picture here. Well, it's still within a couple of degrees of its sextile to Mars, and a couple of degrees with its sextile to Uranus, and it's still coming into that, so it's building. But the predominant energy here is what was exuberant, Mars, Jupiter before, is now a bit crazy. Maybe things have gotten out of hand. Maybe when we're looking at international politics, one can't help but imagining what may play out in the Ukraine, just as an example, with that Mars. See, because Mars is physical energy, Mars is aggression, Mars is the warrior, Mars is red hot, Mars is the superhero who believes he can save the day right now in this moment. And when it hits that trine to Uranus, the energy flows, and Uranus is lightning striking. It's kapow right now. Bam. And so there can be some sudden explosive energy, but there also can be some real breakthroughs here. So we don't want to paint too much fear into this, because obviously what we imagine feeds into what actually occurs. So we need to be careful always in astrology as to how we imagine or paint future transits. We don't want to Pollyanna them and just make them go into denial and say things, are just all wonderful. But at the same time, we don't want to automatically feed into the fears of the worst possible outcome. That's February 8th. By February 11th, we have Mercury moving direct now. It had stationed and retrograded and then stationed direct. And now as Mercury is moving direct forward, by the 11th, you can see that Mercury catches up to Pluto, and the Mercury-Pluto conjunction occurs early in the morning on the west coast here at about 6 a.m. on February 11th. and that's, again, secrets are being revealed. People, but it's also combat, not Mars combat. It's people say things that in some ways have to do with their dominance, with bettering their position. We always have to be careful when planets, personal planets like Mercury and Venus and Mars, line up with Pluto, because Pluto doesn't like it when people try to use him to their advantage. Pluto, it's like Mr. Spock in Star Trek. Pluto likes it when things are for the good of the many, not for the individual. And so, because Pluto is the masses. And so in some way, this Mercury conjoining Pluto, we may be told very powerful lies that have to do with holding something back and holding something secret, but there's an opposite and equal force going on of those secrets coming out into the open. Both things happen on both sides of that equation. As we move on, the next significant thing that occurs is that Mercury, which is moving rather quickly right now, Mercury actually moves from 29 degrees of Capricorn to 0 degrees of Aquarius. Now, Mercury had moved into Aquarius, retrograded back into Capricorn. Now it's back in Aquarius. And this actually technically happens in the just afternoon on February 14th. So if we move this back to Valentine's Day on February 14th, it looks like Mercury is still in Capricorn, but by 2 o'clock in the afternoon here on the West Coast, therefore by 5 o'clock in the evening on the East Coast, that Mercury will have moved out of Capricorn and into Aquarius. Why is that significant? Well, it's Valentine's Day, and Valentine's Day being the day of love, and I always think it's unusual or odd that the day of heartfelt love is when the sun is in Aquarius, when there's a bit of emotional separation, and it's almost more like about friendship. But if you think about it, even in grade school, at least in the United States when I was a kid, Valentine's was about exchange of cards and candy between friends, not necessarily love or loves. But with Mercury moving into Aquarius on Valentine's Day, make your friends your Valentines. You know, there's something here about the energy moving from Capricorn, where everything has to have a purpose, into Aquarius, where there's just this sense of equality. And friendship, of course, there is no one in charge. There is no dominant and submissive person, as there may be in an intimate relationship, that friends are, in fact, always equals. Look also, though, at Venus and Mars. As they're inching closer and closer together, they're kind of traveling around the same speed now. But look, they're already they're about a fifth of a degree, no, even closer than that. They're like a sixth of a degree apart. And they are moving closer and closer day by day, not only together, but also to line up with Pluto. And this is interesting as this unfolds in February. I think it actually will be, there's a lot of creativity here. There's a bit of magic. You know, Venus and Mars are the cosmic lovers. And yet, in a way, they're also the ultimate sense of creativity and play that can occur when two people actually love each other and respect each other, that they can encourage that dance between I want and here's how I'm going to get it, or I want to give to you what it is that you want. And there's that sense of creativity that occurs when Venus and Mars are together, and I think that we will see this build throughout the month, but at the same time, day by day, they're getting closer and closer to Pluto, and so it's not just a fifth house leonine playful creativity. This is a creativity of something's expressing that's deep. It's something that's coming up from the bottom of the ocean, from a really deep place. And when I say the ocean, I really mean the ocean of consciousness, the seas, you know, of metaphysical being, from the depths of our own individual unconsciouses? Yeah, you know what I mean. So this is Valentine's Day. As we move on, we have then Venus actually catching up with Mars, and that occurs here on the 16th. It's exact. That's the exact Venus-Mars Venus-Mars conjunction. But what's intriguing here is that this is also the full moon. And the full moon is not at noon, it's at 8:56 a.m. here in Seattle. So we are now looking at the chart of the Leo full moon. The Leo full moon is always an interesting one to me because the sun is as far away from its home sign, its domicile, as it can get. The sun is weak in Aquarius, at least in the northern hemisphere, where it's the middle of winter and the sun seems oh so far away. The sun is actually in its detriment, and it's not happy being there. And yet the moon is actually in the sun's domicile. And so we have this tug of war, as we do at every full moon, between the sense of personal I, that's Leo, I love you. That's the I want you to see me and appreciate me, and I want you to do nice things for me. I want to do nice things for you. There's that sense of the drama of self-expression that goes along with that Leo full moon. And yet, in Aquarius, it says, no, forget about the I and me in this. Let's look at the everybody. Let's look at how this works for the society, for the family, for the community, for the culture. And so we have this tug of war between individuality and collective consciousness. And this is an interesting. It's an interesting full moon because there's not a huge amount going on, except there is, in fact, a sextile that is close to being exact. Remember, I mentioned this earlier. It's exact on February 17th. And that is the sextile between Jupiter and Uranus. And this is like potential is opening up. It's like the skies are the horizon is becoming more distant. Suddenly, it's like the sky turns blue and all of a sudden we can see things that we're hopeful for. And I think that this is really good news. And yet, at the same time, we also have that Venus-Mars conjunction forming semi-sextiles with Saturn. That's the green lines. And normally I don't pay a huge amount of attention to semi-sextiles, but they can be really important, and I'll tell you why. If you have two planets that are semi-sextile from one to another, in this case, the Venus and Mars at nearly 17 degrees. Here at 9 a.m., they're at 16 degrees and 56 minutes of Capricorn. That's almost 17 degrees. And Saturn is at 17 degrees of Aquarius. What that means is that if you have planets at 17 degrees anywhere else in the zodiac, at any other sign, it's going to be making an easy aspect to one of those two planets and a difficult aspect to another. Just as an example, if you have, let's say, a planet at 17 degrees of Libra, what that means is that Saturn is transiting Saturn is trining your 17-degree Libra planet. But it also means that Venus and Mars are squaring it. And so this is the crazy thing about semi-sextiles and quincunxes, because they both mean that those two planets that are either a sign apart or one sign away from an opposition apart, it means that when one planet gets hit, the other, in an easy way, the other one's getting it more difficult. And so there's just this kind of ongoing annoyance or discomfort. I sometimes call the quincunxes and the semi-sextiles, rather than alignments, I sometimes refer to them as misalignments. They're annoying. And yet this Venus and Mars in this semi-sextile with Saturn, I think, is important, and it's fed by the fact that the moon is actually in a quincunx with Pluto. But there's this energy that doesn't feel right. We look also at that sweet opening potential of the possibilities of the Jupiter sextile to Uranus, and we look at Chiron right smack in the middle, and that Chiron is half of a sextile or a semi-sextile to Jupiter on one side and Uranus on the other. Again, there's annoyance here. This full moon to me is it's an annoying full moon. It's not hugely powerful unto itself, but there is one other thing that is significant, and I think it is important, and it does add a bit of weight and interest, and that is that this full moon is at the nodal bendings. In other words, we have a fixed grand square if we look at the opposition of the sun and the moon, which is square the opposition of the north and south node of the moon. And this is a particularly interesting thing. There's a karmic signature to this. There's some because nodes, they're like vortexes. It's like energy that is going into a black hole and comes out of a white hole somewhere else. There's something like wormholes that bring that channel the energy from one place to another, and so I do think that although there's nothing obvious here about planets that are impacting the Pluto to the Sun, which we mentioned as being a semi-sextile. We didn't mention that, because I don't have aspects drawn to the moon, but I'm drawing it in right now, that the moon is also quincunx to Pluto. So there's that intensity that is getting in the way. We would like to have that moon and Pluto. We would like to go back to, playful, easygoing summertime living, even though it's the dead of winter. But that moon quincunx to Pluto is also, it's stopping us. So I don't see this as an easy full moon at all, but I don't see it nearly as dynamic as the new moon coming up, which we will look at that chart in just a moment. But I do think that the Venus-Mars conjunction at the time of the full moon, it is exact 2 hours prior. The full moon is at 8:56 a.m. and the Venus conjunct Mars is exact at 6:28 a.m. 8:56 a.m. 6:28 a.m. So it's just a couple of hours away from being absolutely exact. Now, as we move ahead, the next important thing that occurs is that on the 18th, the sun, which is moving about a degree a day, moves from Aquarius into Pisces. This is the first incursion of the faster moving planets into Pisces. Jupiter's already in Pisces, but Jupiter's in Pisces, for, I was going to say the whole year, but it's not, because Jupiter's flying through Pisces. And in fact, by the middle of April, that Jupiter will be lined up with Neptune in Pisces, and before we know it, that Jupiter will be on into Aries. It's like Jupiter does not waste any time in Pisces, nor does it waste time in Aries. Its orbit is such that it moves through those signs pretty quickly. But with the sun in Pisces, there is a shift of energy. There's a sense that the waters are running again. This puts us back in touch with our compassion, our feelings. Now, Jupiter's been there. It's not like we haven't had any compassion. But as the sun moves through this, and the sun eventually in March, in early March, the sun will actually catch up with Jupiter, and then the sun will catch up with Neptune. These are all powerful spiritual sharings, awakenings, movement, openings. And again, Jupiter is sextile. It's already past the sextile a little bit, but it's just minutes away. And so we're getting a sense of this Piscean energy as really kind of coming in, giving us an opportunity to care. With compassion for those who are less fortunate than us, or those who are different than us. There's a sense of, the sun in Pisces also can be a bit delusional. Think Neptune. It's spiritual and imagination, but we can also get hung up in in belief systems that just don't have anything to do with reality. And I think this is something that grows on us through the end of February and even through March and into April, is the need for acknowledging that spirituality, imagination, dreams, that kind of mental creativity that goes outside the boundaries of whatever the physical structures are, that's all good, as long as we recognize that it's something different than reality. You see, Neptune and Jupiter may not always be real. Jupiter is the potential and the hope that something becomes real. And of course, before Neptune was discovered, Jupiter also had that Neptunian feel of the hope also. But you see, between Neptune and Jupiter, it's that imagination that creates the scaffolding for us to actually build reality on. So when Saturn comes through any area of a chart that has already been Jupitered or Neptuned, Saturn actually puts reality where the dreams were. Now, some of the dreams may fall away, and some of the dreams may not seem quite as sweet and magical and pleasant, or even beautiful as they were when they were in the realm of imagination, but that's Saturn's job, is to make Jupiter and Neptune real. And of course, we will have Saturn moving through Pisces, not this year, but beginning next year. Okay, so we have the sense of the Pisces energy, beginning, and then the next stop we want to make is a short stop, I'm not referring to baseball here, on February 21st, where we actually have a couple of semi-squares building. And remember, semi-squares are like squares. They're conflictual, but the conflict isn't always quite as out in the open as they are when it's a square. But here we have first Mercury semi-squaring Neptune on the 21st, and we also then will have, let's see, there's another semi-square. We have Jupiter semi-squaring Pluto on the 23rd. So you can see there's two sets of orange lines there. And both of these semi-squares between Mercury and Neptune, there's an annoyance here because the magic may have been a lie. That which we saw with the, with the sun moving into Pisces and the dreams and the hopes, that Neptune semi-square to the Mercury semi-square to Neptune kind of sorts out what's real from what's not real. And then on the 23rd, when Jupiter makes the half square to Pluto, that's a bit more positive, I think, although there can be some angst tied up in it. When Jupiter and Pluto get together, often those things which were very difficult and complicated and even fearful, or they were fear-creating, what's the word, terrifying, that when Jupiter connects up with Pluto, those fears can become bigger. Jupiter's a magnifying lens, but they also then can become more apparent so that we can actually work with them and do something about them. So I think that this Jupiter semi-square Pluto on the 23rd is important because it gives us something to work with. Now, the other thing that's happening here is that Mars and Venus are both, remember, Mars is moving a little faster than Venus now. Venus will gain speed and cross that Mars again. But because Venus is still slow because it's still coming out of her retrograde. But Mars is actually coming into a sextile with Neptune that's exact on the 23rd. There we can see that Mars at 22 degrees of Capricorn is sextile Neptune at 22 degrees of Pisces. We can also see how exact the Jupiter semi-square Pluto is. That orange line has thickened up quite a bit. And so that's on the 23rd. But because Venus is just a degree behind Mars, we have Mars making a sextile with Neptune on the 23rd. And then on the 24th, we have Venus coming in and making that same sextile. So it's really like 2 days of that same energy of that Venus and Mars sextiling Neptune. What does that mean? It means all of a sudden dreams and imagination and fantasy and romanticism and all those lovely things that happen when the cosmic lovers, Venus and Mars, connect up in a positive way with fantasy. And again, it can be really healthy as long as we recognize it as fantasy. Doesn't mean it can't become real, but it does mean that it's not real yet. It's fantasy. Then on the 24th, we have Mercury coming into a square with Uranus. Now, this is a little bit of a different flavor. We can see here that it is 10 degrees and 54 minutes to 11 degrees and 24 minutes. But you see, Mercury here is making a square to Uranus. And this square that Mercury is making to Uranus is like the square that the Sun made to Uranus at the end of January, because then the Sun conjoined Saturn. We talked about that earlier. That happened on February 4th. What's going to happen here is that Mercury is going to make, or is on the 24th, and it's later in the day, Mercury will make that square with Uranus. And then on March 2nd or 3rd, that Mercury will catch up with Saturn and make its conjunction with Saturn. We'll look at that chart in just a moment when we get to the new moon. Mercury square Uranus is, it can be innovation, it can be breakthrough, it can be crazy talk, it can be ideas coming through so quickly and downloading so fast that we can't even remember what the brilliant idea was that we had an hour ago. It's a good day to carry around a pencil. Oh, how analog. Or a pad or smartphone or something that you can take notes on, because when Mercury squares Uranus, it can be brilliant, but the stuff happens very, very quickly. Mercury is also making a sextile with Chiron. That's actually exact earlier in the day, or late on the 23rd, even, depending on where you are. And that has to do with talking about it. So in a way, talking about it here can create a healing nature, but then something crazy happens or something unexpected happens, and we find a bit of instability. Things don't necessarily go where we think they're going when we have conversations with Mercury squaring Uranus. By the way, that Mercury squaring Uranus is again the first of two more that will occur, and actually Venus will square Uranus and conjoin Saturn. Mars will square Uranus and conjoin Saturn, but not until March and April. So that's the excitement on the 24th. And then on the toward the end of the month, the energy is quiet, but there are a couple of semi-sextiles again that I think are significant because this month has a lot of semi-sextiles in it. Now, Mercury makes a semi-sextile with Jupiter, and that is on the 26th. We got to back this up just a touch. There's Mercury making that semi-sextile, 13 degrees of Aquarius to 13 degrees of Pisces. Again, there's a bit of an annoyance here about how far do we grow. What's interesting here is that Mercury is first making that buzz with Jupiter, maybe overextending, maybe saying too much. Remember, it's just coming off that square to Uranus where it probably already did push something too far. And now it has yet to come in and answer to Saturn, but that doesn't happen until March. The other semi-sextile that we have that's exact on the 28th is that Chiron is actually making a semi-sextile to Uranus on one side, and the Sun is coming into it on the other side. It's just about almost there. It reaches that exact point at 8 o'clock at night Pacific time, so it's still late at night even on the East Coast. So that's the ending of the month, but we can't end until we get to the new moon, because look at that moon, at the end of the month, that moon is already coming across Mercury and Saturn. This is a hard one. This is difficult because that moon, it's about people having to become culpable for what they said. I often think of Mercury conjuncting Saturn is that if you get caught in a lie, you have to come clean rather than just doubling down and becoming more rigid about what it is. Often our thinking is not quite right, and that Mercury-Saturn says we need to adjust our thinking so that we get it right. Mercury-Saturn is also about saying more with less. I think of Albert Einstein's chart because Albert Einstein had Mercury conjoined with Saturn, I think in Aries, if I'm not mistaken. I may not be right there. But Mercury with Saturn, Einstein said E equals mc squared. And in some ways that he said more in those three letters than many people have said in their entire lifetime. It's how much can you say in how few words? And so that Mercury conjuncting Saturn on the 28th gets the brunt of the moon coming across it, and we may feel like we didn't say enough. We may feel like we missed something. We may feel like we're not getting it right. We may feel like we're not smart enough, that we can't argue our point of view well enough to make anyone believe us. That's on the 28th. At 9:35 a.m., on March 2nd, Pacific time, we have a new moon in Pisces. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because when I do the March forecast, we'll drill down closer on this. And for those of you who are on the $3 a month solar tier in Patreon, you'll get the mid-month update, and we'll talk about this new moon quite extensively on the mid-month update in February. But just very briefly, because this is really the culmination of February, even though it's in March. Look at that Venus-Mars-Pluto. That's a powerhouse. That is intense energy. It's volatile. And yet Venus is there. It has passions tied up with it. It's hard to tell whether these are passions that are locked against each other or with one another. But they are certainly locked against something. Why do I say that? Because they are closely semi-square. Remember, a 90-degree angle is a square, 1/4 of a circle. A semi-square is a half of a quarter, an eighth, a half of 90, which is 45 degrees. And we look at that and we realize that that triple planet conjunction, that powerhouse in Capricorn, that has to do with the deconstruction. This is, remember, Pluto's ending days in Capricorn. When it moves into Aquarius, it won't be back in Capricorn for another 230 some odd years. And its job in Capricorn is to break down all the structures that need to be broken down so the new can be constructed. You remember, it's Pluto that breaks down the cellular structure of the caterpillar so it can reorganize as a butterfly. So with Mars and Venus, personal planets, lining up with Pluto, we have this intense breaking down of structure, and yet it's at odds with, it's a half a square to the new moon and even to Jupiter in Pisces, which means that this whole sense of the potential of how imagination can get us out of this, how we can dream our way through this, our sense of illusion. Again, we're back to fantasy on some level, but with Jupiter, there's this hope of how things can happen. It ain't going to happen that way. We have hard work to do, and that hard work is represented by those planets in Capricorn. We also have that new moon not only in a half square to Pluto and Venus and Mars, but also in a sextile to Uranus. So remember, the new moon at the beginning of the month, or the end of January, was coming into a conjunction with Saturn. This one is more spacey. This is more open, even though there's an annoyance to that energy, a conflict with that leftover energy in Capricorn, it's not aspected to Saturn, but it is aspected to Uranus. And the aspect to Uranus is a sextile. This is suggesting that there is movement. Remember, the Sun makes that sextile to Uranus on March 1st, I think. Sun sextile Uranus, is on March 1st. And then the Moon is sextile Uranus just maybe an hour or so, if that, before the actual new moon itself. So we have that sense of breaking through again. We have that sense of kind of pushing into somewhere new, but this time, because it's a sextile, it doesn't hit up Saturn quite the same way. The new moon and the Sun will both make semi-sextiles with Saturn, but that doesn't have quite the same power as the square or the opposition. And so it's interesting now we're getting a flavor of something occurring where we're almost trying to leave Saturn behind, but Mercury is still there. Mercury is still forcing us to think about those structures. There's something about that Mercury conjuncting Saturn that is also playing into the Venus-Mars-Pluto in Capricorn. Why? Because Saturn is mutually at home in Aquarius and Capricorn. And so with that Mercury lining up with Saturn, it's almost acting like a bridge between the old Saturn and the new Uranus. That's it. It's quite an extraordinary month, and yet there's no individual things that are like the singular thing that stands out. It's almost the dynamic of moving into new territory, the dynamic of having all 7 quote-unquote real planets and Chiron all moving direct. There's that sense of we are moving into new territory, but we can't let go of the old quite yet. It's almost like there's a process that has to play through. I can't remember who it was that said, nature is always on time. We can't push or pull the planets and make them go any faster or slower than they're going to go on their own. We can simply enter into the dance and guide and help the unfolding as best we can. And I think in February we're getting the chance to do that, but we're not going to make things happen any quicker than they're going to happen. And part of February is that still the dynamics from 2020 and 2021 are not out of our system. It's really going to take until the end of this year and on into 2023, even into 2024 and onward, for us to get this one left in the past. That's it. Don't forget to sign up for my Instagram at Rick Levine Astrologer. Don't forget that if you're in the LA area, Conscious Life Expo is going to be an incredible event. And although you get to see me there, there are so many other amazing speakers. I can't even go down the list, but there's people from many different areas. Whitley Strieber, Daniel Brinkley. I mean, it's a list of people. If you're in the LA area, check that out, consciouslifeexpo.com. And don't forget to sign up for the Changing of the Gods. Register now so that you're in the loop, and that on February 22nd, when the events begin showing a day at a time, you are there. It'll be worth it. Trust me, this is going to be a really, really impactful documentary. That's it for now. I'll see those of you that I see in Los Angeles. I'll see those of you that I see at the mid-month update. For those of you who are on the Patreon solar level. And for everyone else, remember, think cosmically, but act locally. You can think the most awesome, cosmic, magical, cool shit you could possibly imagine, but if you don't put it into use in your own life on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis, what's the use? Think cosmically, act locally. I'm Rick Levine, out.